Okay. We're live.
Great. And you've got the countdown timer ready to go?
I do.
So as of this moment, people are getting notifications. Our subscribers, the ones who've signed up for notifications, which is about 15,000 people, will receive a notice that we're live, and they'll start logging in, and they'll be able to see us and hear us even when Emmy's going to start sharing her screen, and there we have this beautiful rotating colorful rainbow yin yang and a countdown clock, but they'll still see little thumbnail images of each of us, and we'll hear everything we say.
And right now they're seeing all of us in a grid, the way we see each other. Everybody's seeing us like this, but in about 1 minute I'll start the timer.
Is it is there anything that I could do to put out the fact that I'm live on this on my social media? It has
yes, I did send you in the email yesterday.
You did in the email. Okay, I've got that. Good.
At the bottom of the email is the YouTube link that people can log into.
Great. I will do that.
Oh, so that's for anybody, because I thought that you said friends and colleagues. I thought, should I be spreading this further than that?
I'll use that right now.
Anybody can join the YouTube channel.
Oh, okay. I'll put that up then.
Go up and do this right now.
And then, of course, if you want to mute yourself at any time, if you're not speaking, just to limit background noise, or if you need to clear your throat or anything, that's always an option as well. Just when we have so many people on.
No, I didn't realize it was an option to clear your throat. Yeah, got it.
And it looks like everything's working smoothly today.
You sound surprised. I
personally
had
some major
should always be surprised
and rather frightened.
On one occasion, we had to switch Zoom channels. We had to all log off of this Zoom channel and log on to another one. So on other occasions, the countdown clock didn't start as it was supposed to, but this is working really nicely today. So I think it's a good omen.
Yes, and we have people joining from the Netherlands. So those who can hear us, we'd love to know where you're joining from. And if you want to chat that in, a lot of people are saying hello and they're excited for the live stream today.
And before we formally begin, if you have anything you'd like to say to the people who are logging in now, that's fine.
Okay, I just posted it. Hello all over the world.
Hello from Poland, Costa Rica, California, Canada, Pennsylvania, New York.
50% of our audience is outside of the United States.
Berlin, Florida, France, Iceland, and so forth. It's always fun to see where everybody's joining from. Netherlands, South Africa.
Okay, yeah, my link's working, so it went out to a few hundred people.
Thank you for sharing that. Sweden.
Whether they see it's another question.
Well, the video will remain up. It'll be archived. It'll be permanently
Oh, excellent.
on the web. And typically we get, while we're live, we typically get 1,000 to maybe 3,000 people. Before the day is over, it could be up to 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people will see the video. And then this topic is our most popular topic. So video could easily be seen by over 100,000 people in the next month or so.
And it's the same link that everybody is joining on right now. It'll be the same link to share.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was my other question.
Mhm. Somebody's joining from Iran,
Oh,
Arizona, Virginia. And we're already getting good questions coming in.
so I haven't talked to you, Daz, in quite a while. Last time we spoke, as I remember, you were reaching out to the person who had worked with Ingo Swann on the remote viewing of the moon.
Oh, yeah, that's some while ago. Yeah, that went well. I had lots of background on that. I'm currently in production of a 3-part remote viewing production that I'm putting together, and it's like in 3 parts on the remote viewing Roswell. The first part's going to be an unpublished report that Ingo Swann did in 1993, where he sent his top viewers to look at Roswell. Of course, we have a lot more information now, so that's very valuable. Then second part, I have my remote viewing of Roswell with Dick Algier that we did for Farsight. And then I have a more recent Deborah Linkat's remote viewing of Roswell project. So 3 remote viewing of Roswell projects over a span of 40 years, all with very confirmatory data, especially in light of all the latest stuff and, Lou Elizondo saying Roswell's real and all that kind of stuff.
Since you mentioned that, I'll be back in a second.
I just wanted to mention that for those of you who are just joining us, thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started in just under 4 minutes. And if you do enjoy this program, please like it. If you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe it and also share it with anybody who you know might enjoy it. And we appreciate that.
If you haven't seen this, you probably have. Let's see.
I have seen that, yes.
Yeah. This is Yana Roga, who is one of our volunteers today, as far as I know, has just published this book, which contains a whole series of remote viewings going back to Pat Price in the 1970s, in which he claims that he was able to remote view 4 different UFO bases inside 4 different mountains on different continents on Earth. And then over the next 15 or 20 years or so, a number of other viewers were tasked with those same locations. So this book contains all the raw data of all of those viewings. And they were all double-blind viewings, but the similarity among them, I think, is striking.
Yeah, it's a good one for the library, that one, definitely. And it's got some more recent, not unseen remote viewing that's never been released before in there as well.
Yeah. They were originally done, I think most of them by Skip Atwater, or all of them really, as training for the Fort Meade remote viewers. So they were never, because they were just considered training, it never got reported up the chain of command into the military.
Yeah.
Jeff, can you mention the name of the book that you just shared again? Somebody is in the chat.
Yeah, it's called Project 8200, the original remote viewing transcripts, UFO, UAP bases and activities. The author is Skip Atwater, who was the director of training for the remote viewing program at Fort Meade in Maryland. And the publisher is Center Lane Books, which is owned by Yana Roga, who is a volunteer for New Thinking Aloud and the managing editor of the New Thinking Aloud magazine. And this was just published, I think, within the last 2 months.
Yep.
Okay, we'll be going live in about half a minute. Well, we are live. We'll be starting officially. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I'm with the New Thinking Aloud co-host, Emmy Vadnais, as well as a number of guests who are all contributors to the new volume in the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues series, UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? I have with me Bob Davis, Charles Upton, Greg Bishop, Daz Smith, Nick Cook, and Whitley Strieber. And we will be taking your questions. But before we do that, I want to give each of our guests an opportunity to say hello to our viewing audience and to introduce themselves. And let me start with you, Bob. You wrote the foreword to our book.
And I appreciate the invitation to do so, Jeff, and thank you very much. I would say my journey in this arena stands as largely a testament to intellectual curiosity, but also that of an experiencer. But as a professor and a researcher in the neurosciences, and I guess you'd call it a closet ufologist within the halls of academia for over 3 years, I've researched literature and events surrounding the UAP since the 60s. But in the past few post-retirement years, I guess you can call it, defied the constraints of the ordinary life in retirement and embarked basically on a journey to bridge that so-called gap between scientific inquiry and the exploration of extraordinary experiences, not limited to just UAP. My recent experience with the UAP, however, began when I observed 2 large orange orbs in the night sky in Sedona, Arizona, and I believe it was 2015 on the Bradshaw Ranch, which is considered their version of the Skinwalker Ranch. And that compelled me to write my first book on the topic, which apparently got the attention of Edgar Mitchell, who, for those who may not know, was an engineer and astronaut and the 6th person to walk on the moon, and who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He invited me to serve as an administrator and researcher for the organization, which is called the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, known as FREE. And we conducted the first large-scale comprehensive investigation of over 35 individuals who reported various forms of contact experience with non-human intelligence as part of the UAP. And among other things, our survey analysis addressed a diverse range of physical and non-physical aspects of reported non-hypnotic based recall. That's an important concern of such interactions. And I co-authored an article that was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2018. And the title was a study on reported unidentified aerial phenomena and associated contact with non-human intelligence. But very briefly, based on our results, which I hope we can address in more detail during this interview, we concluded that these contact experiences, not surprisingly, are extremely complex. It involves a wide range of physical, psychological, perceptual, and certainly paranormal events, leading to considerable life-changing psychological outcomes in many, not all cases, and non-ordinary states of consciousness. And these experiences do not necessarily conform to that traditional belief of the alien abduction, so to speak, as being largely negative, which Hopkins and among others would paint it as, in the past at least. In fact, we found that about 80% of the participants claimed that their contact experience had a positive impact on their lives, although there are certainly many profoundly negative interactions, as Whitley certainly can attest to. And about 2/3 of the participants reported experience an altered state of reality during these interactions, where consciousness actually departed from their body. They lost awareness of their physical form. They claimed to have met a non-human being in a type of reality, called a matrix reality, that had no boundaries, similar to what you would expect in the middle of outer space, is what they described, which to them was as real as talking with a family member. So overall, I would say our study emphasized that alterations in consciousness, however that may be defined, let's call it a non-physical component, is a major, nevertheless, component of the phenomena, which led to my increased interest in that topic area, to the point where my objective now is to elevate the awareness, understanding, and implications of extraordinary human experiences like ESP, NDE, and OBEs, certainly the UAP, and they all have many similarities. I'm doing this in a new book and also in a film that I'm now co-producing with Dave Beatty and Wilson Hawthorne called The Consciousness Connection. In fact, we had the pleasure of interviewing Jeff last fall, who will be one of several participants in the film. And for those interested, if I may plug, more information about the film can be found on our website, consciousnessfilm.info, and my Facebook page group entitled The Consciousness Connection Group.
We'll publish all the contact information of all of our guests in the description of this video. But let's move on. Charles, can I call on you? Your perspective, I think, is unique because you come to the study of UFOs as a poet, philosopher, and a specialist in the traditionalist movement of spirituality.
Well, yes, I tend to be the contrarian, not just in UFO circles, but wherever I go, because that's apparently my destiny. Yeah, I'm at this point. As for my spirituality, I'm a Sufi Muslim, but I have a background in the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church in which I was raised. So this, has a certain degree, a lot of influence in my worldview. And of the many things that I have said in my book, which is The Alien Disclosure Deception, the Metaphysics of Social Engineering, I picked out 3 for today, which probably cover most of the territory. 2 of them have to do with themes that were furthered greatly by Jacques Vallée. It's too bad that he's not here, so I could say congratulations on bringing these forward. The one is, of course, the view of what the UFO aliens are, which was presented pretty much in his book, Passport to Magonia, that these beings much more clearly fit the parameters of subtle beings from what In Islam, we would call the alam al-mithal, or the imaginal plane, or the intermediary plane, or the psychic plane. Some call it the etheric plane. In other words, they didn't get here in big, clunky spaceships held together with nuts and bolts from some star many light years away. Even with the most arcane technologies we can imagine that an advanced civilization would come up with, I think that's stretching it a bit. I won't say it's totally impossible, but generally speaking, that's a real stretch. The least stretch is to say, well, these are the beings that Muslims have always called the jinn, that the Northern Europeans have called the fairies, that the Greeks called the daimones, and that the Christians call the demons. I think they fit that parameter pretty well. And as for the last characterization as demons, one of the best sources of evidence for this is the stories of Whitley Strieber, who is with us today, who talks about how absolutely horrible his experience was. Although, strangely enough, in his interview in UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? The book that Jeffrey just brought out, he spoke of having learned to enjoy this experience of horror. And I would just say that is where we differ. I mean, to each his own, you know, if whatever turns you on, horror doesn't turn me on. It's not like I'm not familiar with it. You know, I have a lot of experience of very dark forces myself. The only difference is I don't enjoy them, and I don't consider them my friends or my guides. If some being, human or non-human, abuses me, let that being know that he has made an enemy. And that's the way it's going to remain. I don't put up with stuff like that if I can help it. So that's one. Another one is, that might have covered two of them, actually. Yeah. The other one is essentially, I believe we're in the middle of a social engineering campaign of many decades duration, pointed toward the creation of a UFO religion or alien worship religion of one kind or another. And we may be sitting here together, insofar as we're together through cyberspace, partly through the ministrations of this agenda and this program that has been working, you know, overtime and coming out every media outlet you can see, you know, with ideas like the aliens created us at this and this and this. What is most interesting here, I'll finish with this, is something I've found by a William Sims Bainbridge, who is a well-known transhumanist. He's very much integrated into the scientific establishment of this country, you know, and goes and travels in very exalted circles. Back in 1981, he read a paper at the 19th Goddard Memorial Symposium of the American Astronautical Society, which took place in Pentagon City, Virginia, undoubtedly on Pentagon property, probably attended by a number of the you know, military brass from that institution. And in that, he said this: these flying saucer cults are all quite insignificant, but one like them could well rise to prominence in a future decade. We need several really aggressive, attractive space religions, meeting the emotional needs of different segments of our population, driving traditional religions and retrograde cults from the field. New cults tend to be not very creative, but draw their practices and doctrines from other groups and traditions. If they are to get galactic visions, the best source is probably science fiction. Not only does science fiction offer grand images of galactic civilizations and specific notions of how to achieve them, but it is drenched in occult and pseudo-scientific ideas which might well serve people's religious needs if packaged in new churches. So I think this is essentially the goal this of an awful lot of action on the part of the military industrial intelligence complex for many decades. This is what they want to create, and they've done a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned. So
Let me cut you off, Charles, so we can move on.
yeah, I was just going to say, I was first alerted to this by Whitley Strieber in his wonderful book, Messengers of Deception, which everybody ought to read. Okay.
Oh, okay, Greg Bishop.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Messenger Deception, I think, was Jacques Vallée's book. It's actually one of them. Yeah, you said
What did I say? Whitley Strieber. What did I say?
Yeah, I think you said
sorry,
Whitley.
Yeah,
I think Whitley might like to take credit for it.
Not hardly.
It's
Really,
a great book. I
that's
highly
what
recommend.
opened me to the whole field of ufology.
Yeah, I got interested in this when I was a kid, and then I stopped being interested in this subject for a while, and then it all came rushing back as an interest in the late '80s when I started writing about the subject. I met Bill Moore at that point, and out of that acquaintance and friendship came the book Project Beta, which probably some people know about. The thing is, that book was about government interaction with UFO researchers, basically, and was kind of a warning not to take what somebody coming from apparent position of authority tells you, especially if it flatters you and your prejudices. And I think that's still true, and it might be even more true now. Unlike Charles, I don't think somebody's trying to start a new religion, but I do think, and when people do ask me about what the government might be doing with UFO subject, my main answer and the main thing that really drives my opinion about it is there's two things. One is whenever the government announces something about UFOs, it is for their benefit and not the benefit of ufologists or even the public. And we have no idea what that is, what the reason is. And two, and I've seen this, and I'm sure other people have, it can be used as sort of a Swiss Army knife for just about anything you want to say about anything to do with politics, with technology, with whatever. This can be put into the mix and to direct and confuse people. But I don't think it's a directing and confusing about the UFO subjects. It's a directing and confusing for us, and especially adversaries, about what we might be doing defense-wise and intelligence-wise. And so I think that's what the main thrust of a lot of this government interest is right now. Somebody wants us to be very interested in this subject in a certain way right now. And I don't think we'll know why for probably many years, if ever. And you look at this and you think, it's hopeless. How can we find anything else? How can we find anything about this subject? How can we learn about it? Well, we have the best resource of all in these people that are here with us today, and authors that you like, and people that are independent researchers, and people that experience the phenomenon for themselves, abductees, experiencers, whatever you want to call them, witnesses. Those people have direct experience with what's going on, and those are the people we should be listening to. And also, it is, I sell a T-shirt with a picture of a UFO on it, and it says the UFO is a Rorschach blot, which I truly believe. Everybody, you quickly find out what people's opinions are, their politics, everything, when you start talking to them about their opinions about UFOs in a way that you don't see with other subjects. So I went from very early being kind of a nuts and bolts type person, and then I read Vallée, John Keel, and eventually Whitley, and started thinking, well, maybe this is not such a technological nuts and bolts thing. And then I wrote Project Beta, and after that, actually before that, I was much more interested in how people perceive things. How do they perceive things that are unfamiliar? How do they perceive things that are unfamiliar and startling? And maybe they feel threatened by? How does that affect memory? How does that affect perception? And all we're left with really are people's memories and their stories about what they saw and what happened to them. And we have to understand how the human nervous system and psychology deals with those kind of things before we start worming our way back to what the source of this might be. I don't know if we'll ever find out what the source is, but it's certainly conscious. It certainly communicates with us, and it certainly affected a lot of people throughout history. And I think that basically, if your own opinion about this, your own well-informed opinion is better than anything that anybody could feed to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And Daz, you approach the phenomenon as primarily as a remote viewer and a student of remote viewing. We did a fascinating interview on Ingo Swann's unusual book, Penetration. So introduce yourself to our viewers.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Daz Smith, and I hail from the UK. I have a 29-year background in what I call the art of remote viewing and a lifelong interest in all things esoteric. In 1989, I got heavily into UFO studies during the height of the crop circle phenomenon in the UK. And in 1992, at a Leeds UFO conference held by Quest International, I was exposed to the use of remote viewing on UFOs for the first time. And this kind of sent me in a spiral, and I really had to know more. For the past 10 years, I've become one of only a handful of paid full-time remote viewers around the world. And I also document the history of remote viewing. And like many of my peers before me, I also on occasion use remote viewing to look at credible UAP related events and situations. And this is in hope of shedding more light on what is, we all know, a complex subject. Now, my past public remote viewing projects have included Area 51, Roswell, the Tic Tac UAPs. Whitley, who is here today, we looked at his alien implant a year back. The Phoenix Lights, Hitchhiker Effect, Skinwalker Ranch, Bob Lazar, and even some of Colonel Corso's claims. For some of the materials he's had. And over this time, it's been my experience that RV and consciousness interactions can be one of the best tools to investigate this UAP enigma. So I'm glad to be speaking here and glad to be in this book.
Thank you, Daz. And Nick Cook?
I was about to say good evening, Jeff and Emmy. Thank you so much for hosting this. Good day, good evening, all over the world to everyone who's joined us. It's just fantastic to be here. My background in all of this is I was a reluctant entry into this whole field, really. I started out career-wise as the aerospace editor of Jane's Defense Weekly, which is a trade defense magazine. I began my career with that magazine really investigating classified aircraft programs. So I became intensely interested in government secrecy and how you protect real-world defense programs. And as I went on that journey, and that took me into some really amazing places like the Skunk Works in Palmdale, and I traveled around the Soviet Union before it broke up, looking at secret aerospace and defense programs. But it sort of allowed me to ask a very heretical question after a while, which was, okay, so I'm seeing all of this stuff. I've got this kind of passport through the good name of Jane's to get me into all of these official establishments. I shouldn't really waste this ticket. So why don't I look at something that I would consider to be a really deep and dark buried secret and pursue that? And it occurred to me that the deepest, darkest, most buried secret that I could possibly investigate in my field would be a breakthrough propulsion source, something that, coincidentally or not, would give you a capability that would look much like a UFO. So I actually then, in addition to my day job, I kept my eyes and my ears open around that question. And I asked questions that wouldn't get me into trouble. And bear in mind, this was 25 years ago. So the world was a very different place then. And this was a very taboo subject, even more taboo than it is today. So I kept my research very quiet. But in the end, it resulted in a book called The Hunt for Zero Point, which was published in 2001 here and 2002 in the US. And that really looked at the whole question of anti-gravity. Has the US aerospace and defense industry achieved a breakthrough in anti-gravity propulsion? So that was kind of my official kind of unmasking into this world of sort of quasi-ufology. But I still never considered that to be really a kind of UAP, UFO issue. It was really very much more, for me, a nuts and bolts technological issue. But then, as Jeff knows, and as is featured in his splendid volume, which has just come out, UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? In 2014, my wife had what is called a shared death experience when her mother died, and I was in the room when it happened. It was extraordinary to see someone who I know obviously extremely well pronounce that they had been to a place which stretched infinitely time-wise and gave her this sense of all connection and all knowing. I mean, it was classically like a near-death experience, except, of course, she was very much alive. And this introduced me to the whole field of consciousness. I ended up submitting an essay for the BICS competition, and I found myself in the august company of this man here who's hosting it, who won that competition. But for me, that was a really great sort of entree and connection to the whole field of consciousness. So, you know, what I really like to say is that I come from the UFO UAP issue from both sides of the spectrum now, because unquestionably the UFO issue is linked to consciousness. It's not always obvious where those links are, but perhaps we can explore that a bit in today's discussion. But I explore it at the moment. I'm currently exploring it in a serialized new book, which I'm posting every 2 weeks on Substack. So if I can plug rudely for a second, Jeff, that is nickhook.substack.com. And the book is called The Light Beyond the Mountains. And it does explore this hinterland between UFOs and consciousness and everything in between. So I look forward to talking about all of that today. It's great pleasure for me to be in the company that I'm in, and I look forward to some penetrating questions.
Thank you, Nick. And Whitley, you are last but not least.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I've enjoyed listening to everyone's take on this. Personally, I've been on a long arc with this from childhood to now. That was the trajectory petered out when I was about 12 years old, and then was unexpectedly renewed starting in the summer of 1985, which eventually developed into the close encounter experiences that occurred in October and December, which left me in a state of complete disruption. It was a profoundly initiatory experience in the sense that it removed my entire worldview and presented me with an unexpected question so deep that it left me wondering about even the value of my own existence or whether or not I am real. And you can't get deeper than that, and you cannot get more lost than that. However, the experience physically, especially in December, was very difficult. I was raped and I was manhandled, and sexual material was taken from my body. And I had no idea at the time that any of this could even happen. None. I thought I had been assaulted criminally. I started with the New York State Criminal Investigation Division. They couldn't help me because there was no evidence, and I was rather circumspect with them about my memories because they didn't make much sense. And finally, I decided either I was going crazy or I must have been drugged. And so I ended up at the doctor. I'd been experiencing a lot of pain. And he said, you understand, among other things, he said something rather chilling. You understand that you have a lesion in your rectum. It's been injured. It's a wound. And that really threw me for a loop. And we did MRI scans. I did psychological tests because I couldn't remember anything that made any sense. I remembered being attacked by giant insects. And he said, well, why don't you describe to me what you do remember? And I said what I remembered, and he said to me, you don't understand, Whitley. You're telling me you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men, a flying saucer by little men. And I thought, holy God, I've gone crazy. And then I started trying to get my wife to leave me because I was afraid I was becoming psychotic and she would be stuck with a little boy and a psycho as a husband. My entire life fell apart. It was really very disruptive. And finally, I ended up with a book that my brother had sent me for Christmas. And I basically looked at it under the Christmas tree and tossed it over my shoulder because my brother has a talent for sending gifts that absolutely of no interest. And it was called Science and the UFOs by Jenny Randles. I picked it up finally because of what the doctor had said, basically, and thought to myself, this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, but I'm going to read this anyway and see why I would, maybe there's some indication in here of why I would have these memories. And I eventually came across the name of Bud Hopkins, and Ann and I went to meet him. He lived down the road from a few blocks from us in Manhattan. And we both came away from the meeting thinking he was insane. And then he wanted to hypnotize me. And I said to myself, this man is an artist, not a hypnotist, not a psychologist. So I said, absolutely no, absolutely not. And he was having all these fairy tales, in my opinion, then about flying saucers and stuff. And he said, well, how about I try to find someone who has a professional credential? I said, fine. He proceeds to introduce me to Dr. Donald Quine, the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry, and one of the leading forensic hypnotists in the world, and one of the leading psychiatrists in New York and in the world, with an enormous reputation. So I went to Dr. Quine, and we both sort of had a good laugh about Bud. And then we did these 2 hypnosis sessions, which simply appalled me. I had memories that I had not really looked at. It wasn't that these memories came up during hypnosis. They were already there, but they just began to become more concentrated and make more sense. And Dr. Quine had solved, at that point in his career, 72 cases, criminal cases, using his forensic hypnosis techniques. So obviously they worked. He could help people remember license plate numbers and things of vehicles that had knocked them down. So that left me realizing that whatever the hell it was, they were out there. I still didn't and don't know what they are. I don't buy into the aliens, the demons, the angels, all of that nonsense. I mean, it's not nonsense. It's some of it is very well thought out, but there's no proof. It's all ultimately, what do you believe? And I'm not a believer. I don't believe things. That's not it's not how this stuff works. So I'm still at sea about what they are, but I work with them all the time. They are now very much a part of my life. I have gone on a long arc from being terrified to making it a functional part of my experience of living and working.
Right.
And that's kind of where I am now. I will say this, I've also studied memory extensively. The business of relying on memory in a thing like this is extremely problematic. The way memory functions in the human brain, it is intimately connected with imagination in the parietal lobe, and again in the hippocampus and in other parts of the brain. The whole default mode network mixes memory and imagination in order to make this make sense, especially of events that aren't immediately accessible, in the sense that there's something already in the memory to relate them to. So we are profoundly more at sea about this than we realize. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the implant in my ear, which I use in research all the time, is a physical object, but it was placed in there by two people, not by aliens. The UFO, UAP story is real. There are actual physical objects. Now, Lou Elizondo is out there and David Gersh saying that we have bodies. I was told by someone in the military many years ago that we had 4 bodies, and they were being understudied and being dissected at Fort Detrick in Maryland. I don't have a security clearance, so I don't have to shut up about it. So I suppose it's true. And this thing is the most interesting thing about it, is the way it intersects with the physical world while essentially emerging out of some kind of something that is both physically real and part of the imagined and remembered and experienced reality of the non-physical. And of course, I'm working on a new book. Everybody knows that anyway, though. So I'm always working on a new book, so I won't even go into it, but hopefully it'll be published soon.
Very good. Emmy, do you have a question you'd like to begin with?
I do. My question is simply, and maybe if everybody would like to respond to this, what do you think they are? What do you think is happening? How much do you think it's physical versus in the imaginal or part of us? Or I know that's complex, but I'm looking through the questions here from people, and I feel like that might be a good opening question. So if you each want to take maybe,
You know, they have more than one form to them as well.
Thank you. That's a great response. Anybody else would like to who would like to respond to that? I know, Whitley, you said you don't know, so if you so that's fine.
I can say more, but
Sure.
Charles wants to respond.
Yeah, Charles had his hand up.
Oh, please. Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, these beings pretty much follow the parameters of what I'm just looking at from a Muslim standpoint, and they're confluent standpoints. But from the Muslim standpoint, these are the jinn. They are from an imaginal plane, which is like a subtle material dimension, you know, invisible to us, usually very close to the material dimension. What has always been attributed to the jinn is the ability to temporarily materialize, fully materialize in this world. As we know, UFOs appear on radar, leave behind physical traces, but then they disappear. Where did they go? They went back to the world where they came from, which is like a next door reality to us. As for whether they are capable of leaving behind permanent materialized physical objects, I'm not convinced of that, but there is evidence for that. I mean, in Muslim legend, you know, the Prophet Solomon used them as architects, you know, and actually I was once shown an object that was supposed to have been an apport, as it's called in spiritualism. Those supposed to have been materialized by the Hindu guru Satya Sai Baba. It was this ring. Somebody says this. He materialized this out of nothing. Well, I don't know. Who knows? But in other words, those stories have been told. There's one of my Sufi brothers knew some people in one of the Muslim nations who showed him a sword and said, look, this is a family heirloom. It was created by the jinn. Who knows if that's true? You know, I mean, in specific instances, we don't know, but it may well be that that is the explanation for the object that was placed in Whitley's ear. You know, this is what has been powers that have been attributed to the jinn. So,
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. Whitley, did you want to respond?
Well, first of all, I think that we make a great mistake when we do the us versus them thing. One of the most interesting things that has happened in my life in regard to this particular question is Anne's secretary, Laurie Barnes, had quite a few experiences, and they started in 1954, I believe it was. She and her husband then were performers, and he was out on a gig, and she was at home. She was with child, and she was pregnant and lying in bed at 11 o'clock at night reading a book when she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye and looked up and saw these short dark blue troll-like figures standing beside the bed, which of course in 1954 was not something anyone expected to happen. It's not now either, but it's less unexpected now than it was then. And of course she was stupefied with horror, and she recoiled. And the one in the lead said, why do you fear us? And she said, because you're so ugly. And it went like this. It said, do not be afraid. We're not here for you. We're interested in the girl child you're carrying, which is, of course, in 1954, you couldn't tell whether it was a boy or a girl until it came out. I know the girl child now, and she's a lovely person, a very successful person, and we can't really tell why they were interested in her in 1954. In any case, Laurie has long passed this world, and so she might know the answer to the remarkable question that arises out of what was said to her next. He said, after she continued to recoil, he put his hand on her arm and said, do not fear us. One day, my dear, you will look just like us.
Mm.
So the question isn't really about their bodies, I don't think. It's a much larger question. What are we?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a friend of mine, actually, I interviewed him once on my show, and I said, what would you ask an extraterrestrial or alien or whatever it was if you met one? And he said, I would ask them, what do you think I am? And I think that speaks directly what Whitley said, because my idea about this is that whatever is occurring between people and whatever this intelligence is, it's not what it is. It is our perception of what it is our memory of what it is, and it is the interaction between us and whatever that consciousness is. That is what the experience is. I don't know if we have access to, I guess Kant called it the thing in itself. I don't know if we do, and this is a very special case of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much with what Greg and Whitley have said. Having come at it from this nuts and bolts perspective, the question about is it a physical phenomenon or a non-physical phenomenon is deeply interesting to me, because my natural inclination would be to say it's physical, but it clearly is not, or rather it's clearly both. It's both and which has led me to become more interested in a sort of reframed version of the question, which is, what is the nature of our reality? We grow, at least I grew up, believing in a solid 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional reality for most of my life. I've now had to reframe that in my mind to view reality as a much more fluid and malleable thing than I was ever taught at school or through, learning about the nature of existence through my, culture and societal connections. So that is how I prefer to look at it. This is a question of our reality, and rather than the UAP phenomenon being something that intrudes upon this, three-dimensional, four-dimensional existence that we have been taught to believe in, it is to fundamentally question what the nature of our reality is. And I believe that is a science. It's a legitimate science that needs to be explored. And of course, when mainstream science engages on that question more fully by, being prepared to abandon or give up some of the conditions which it has hitherto not been prepared to compromise on, general relativity, the nature of reality, and so forth, I think we're going to make some real progress on that whole question. And I just really look forward to that day when that engagement happens.
Yeah, until we have DNA to confirm maybe what it is or it's not, we're not going to obviously know for sure. But I tend to believe it's different types of intelligences, both having physical and non-physical characteristics that interact with humans in both absurd and non-absurd ways. And in fact, recently the biological anthropologist Michael Masses, proposed that extraterrestrial model of the UAP, which in large part he based on the study results from Free, that over 50% were described as human-looking, who were perceived as benevolent in nature, which is what over 3,500 of our participants said. 80% of the time it was a positive overall experience. Not to say it's not the case in each case, it's certainly not. But he proposed that this intelligence is likely from our future, who care for humanity and to help evolve our species to ensure their own sustenance. Now, agree with it or not, certainly he can't confirm that, but he considered from his perspective, and I'm not a biological anthropologist, what do I know about it? But he looked at the description of the majority of the physical characteristics, and based on what his background dictates, those physical attributes he believes are expected of humans to occur in the future. The large cranium, the smaller nose and ears, the loss of body hair, and possibly even telepathic communication, which the vast majority of participants contend is the way communication, as it occurs. So could this be an evolutionary trend? And we're being visited by the past. And as well, those who are claimed to be abducted, not our contactees, but abducted, meaning physically taken on board a ship where they're medically examined, sperm and ova are extracted. There was about, of those who go on board, and I can't recall the exact percentage, but of a large subset, 1,500, maybe about 50, 60% of them said that, they said to us, in other words, that they're coming here for genetic material to ensure the continuation of the species. Or is that a trickster element, as some may contend? I don't believe it's a trickster element. I believe in more of the absurdity and the control that the intelligence has over humanity, and that we should be studying more of this aspect, the linguistic, the semantic, the exchange of messages, which largely are one of love, spiritual, God, parallel dimensions that most of the people in our study contend. And let me emphasize again, it's not a song and dance. 20%, will say it's they don't want to go through it again and again. It's a very negative. But the more people do go through it, the more they adapt to it and consider it much more positive than the first few interactions that they have.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone. I might just add briefly that we humans are both spiritual and physical beings. So your description of the jinn being able to breach both worlds is, I think, also very true of us. And in fact, I've been spending the last day editing a new interview with, I think, a person who will probably emerge as the leading contemporary theorist on consciousness, Federico Fagin, the person who also built the first microchips, among other things. And he makes the point that our spiritual nature is embodied in the quantum field, which is a non-physical field. But that'll be the topic of another interview, and it's more involved. We have a question from a viewer named Sheila Rower, who asks, what do you think is the strongest evidence that aliens are aspects of ourselves from the future, as opposed to being from other dimensions or other, the way she puts it, different ontological beings? Ourselves from the future, which seemed to be suggested in the story you told about someday we will look exactly like them, Whitley.
Well, the question of time then enters this, and we have a sort of shorthand about time that it is kind of a force in the world, like gravity. It has, we don't understand it or where it comes from, but it's there. I'm not so sure that's correct. There was quite an interesting paper published a few weeks ago by a group of Italian researchers, and I will put details in up in the chat. I don't have it at hand. That suggests that that at the beginning of the universe there was no time, but not until there began to be connections with things that were experiencing duration, was the experience of time formed, and that it's essentially a quantum, and it's not about a flow of time, but about quantum entanglement. If this is the case, then a very interesting possibility emerges. It is possible to disentangle, that is to say, to move your perceptual field outside of the stream of time. If that's the case, then you would have energetic relevance outside of the time stream. And you would be able to manipulate your consciousness in the context of the time stream. You would, in effect, the past would become a kind of a real illusion. It would be mediated in terms of your ability to affect it by two principles of physics. One, of course, is the famous grandfather paradox. You can't go back and kill your own grandfather, and that has been confirmed with experiments modeling movement of photons back into their pasts. They will never contact themselves. The other one, and the one that makes it possible for this to actually happen, is the principle of least action. The principle of least action says nothing in nature will ever do anything it must do by expending any more energy than it must. Water will not stop to look at the view while going down the hill. It's always going to find the easiest direction. So therefore, the principle of least action prevents the grandfather paradox from happening, meaning that you are free to move up and down the river of time from the outside if you can become disentangled. Now, the question of becoming disentangled is one we haven't solved, but nature solves it already in different ways. And it may be that we can understand how to solve it, and becoming disentangled would be a time machine. And we would then see those of us inside time in the same way that a third dimensional being would view those who are inside Flatland. And remember the brilliant book published in the 1890s, Flatland, where a ball goes through a flatlander's surface, and what he sees is a dot that expands into a line and then moves back and turns into a dot and disappears. He never perceives the ball. That's where we are now in the time stream. We can never see it from the outside, but it's possible to do that. And if we did it in the future, then we would come back as something that never existed at all in order to defeat the grandfather paradox. Thus, the aliens would be us from the future.
Well, in the world of quantum physics, past, present, and future, basically exist simultaneously, and we get at least subjective confirmations. On top of that complex mathematical description, which is theoretical in nature, but ascribed to by many physicists, nevertheless, those who have near-death experiences, UAP interactions, out-of-body experiences, ESP, etc., they essentially say the same thing. Time doesn't exist, and I think we've heard that. So can we put those two fundamental elements together where we have confirmation of the subjective and the objective, and we can't still come to any reasonable conclusion? But if they are indeed, as I alluded to earlier, extratemporal, coming from our future, it would account, again, not in my opinion, but that of Mike Masters, for their appearance, which in his mind would be what we would look like in the future. And it certainly would also account for the physical characteristics, which we all know is something our technology can achieve at present.
Well, I would like to address a very interesting thing that Whitley said about disentanglement from time. In my spiritual path, and I believe in any spiritual path with sufficient depth, that's one of the signposts or one of the elements, is the disentanglement from time, from linear time. Traditionally, this is called the realization of aeonian time or aviternity, in which past, present, and future are simultaneous. That's part of the penetration into the present moment, not traveling to the future, traveling to the past, but penetration into the depth of the present moment through what is called the spiritual heart. That's part of a spiritual path. But the present moment, once one is disentangled from time, one is not simply a free agent who can do whatever he wishes based upon agendas brought from the world of time into the world of eternity. You can't use eternity to alter time. That is a contradiction. When in eternity, the intent, you are suffused with a spiritual intent that is from beyond you. Ultimately, it is the will of God that's operating. But, there's a contradiction here, because if we leave the stream of time, disentangle ourselves from linear time, enter aviternity or simultaneity, well, that's wonderful. But as soon as we come back with something we have learned on that level and try to affect once again time, I'm sorry, we lose it immediately, because we're once again entangled as soon as we re-interact with the timeline. So this is a contradiction. The purpose of disentanglement from time is to come into the field of higher spiritual realities that have their own intent, their own ways of operating, and we're not simply going to a neutral space we can manipulate any way we wish. We're going into a space which is fully occupied, and where we are visitors. We're not simply explorers of virgin territory. This is not a virgin, undeveloped territory. This is a kingdom. And we come into the field ultimately of the will of God. And that is the will that we will either assent to, or we will rebel against, or try to divert or try to use for our own purposes. To the degree we do that, attempt to do that, we will fail, and fail very, very severely. This is what every spiritual tradition teaches, in in my understanding.
Me?
Yeah, so we have another question. We have about 30 minutes left. The time is just going so quickly. So I'm going to actually roll two questions into one. This is from Spirit Realm Investigations. They have many questions. And by the way, we're getting a lot of chats in of people saying that you all are a wonderful panel to be discussing this topic. They ask many questions, but one of them is, what if the others are just a projection of the human mind because we inherently believe we need something bigger than us to look to for several reasons, if that makes sense. And then they also ask, why do these anomalies present themselves as glowing orbs? And I think of people like Chris Bledsoe, who's been a guest on New Thinking Aloud. We've been talking about bodies and ships, but also they can present in various ways. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
You know, Lou Elizondo's new book, Imminent, discusses his experience with glowing orbs, which, being a military guy, was pretty scary and negative. Chris's was quite mixed, and I'm going to interview Chris in the fall on my show, probably Lou as well, hopefully, when he gets finished with his CBS and Joe Rogan level of interview and still has a voice left. In any case, I think that a lot of the orbs have got to do with us. I do a meditation at 3 o'clock every morning, and for a lot of reasons. And my house is, as you may imagine, filled with cameras, and orbs often show up. And people who meditate with me at other times of the day have orbs showing up in their lives too. I think some of them have to do with us. Exactly what they have to do with us, I don't know. But I don't think that the barrier that we have between the living and the dead is actually very real. That's more or less in us. One of the first things that when my wife began to communicate with me after she passed away, that I heard from her was, it looks like you're all intentionally ignoring us. So are the orbs us and also others? In other words, I guess it comes down to this. Is that reality and this the dream? Because I have a feeling that might be the case. And that when we see orbs, we're seeing real people. And when we look at each other, we are seeing dreams.
Hmm.
I'd be happy to take the projection question or an aspect of it, Emmy. So I really like to sort of go back to that analogy of the screen of our perception that I was talking about a little bit earlier, and I think Greg has touched on as well. If we take the view, and you know, I need analogies to help me see this stuff. I'm not a physicist. As I say, I've come out of a sort of nuts and bolts tradition, but I'm very much in the consciousness camp when it comes to the UAP phenomenon. So if we take the view that, and it's well expressed to me by Professor Donald Hoffman, who talks about a screen of perception in which or via which consciousness screens out anything that we don't need for our survival. So everything that we see, perceive, is geared to what we need for our survival. We are left with a perceptual interface. And on that interface, all manner of things can project or reflect. And I do think that in amongst a realm of possibilities of what can appear on that interface screen, what can be projected upon it, are our own reflections, if you like. It's a very sort of Jungian view that the archetypes of our innermost thoughts, fears, hopes, dreams can in some shape, way or form be presented on this perceptual interface. And some of them, I'm sure, get twisted and bent out of shape. And, you know, some of these extraordinary creatures that we hear about that appear on in our reality space as we see it are perhaps archetypal projections that are screened on there. in amongst everything else. Of course, it goes without saying, and this is a line that Professor Hoffman takes, which is there should be a sort of way of deconstructing that interface scientifically in a way to understand it. And this gets somewhat into Jacques Vallée's control system theory, that in some ways we are being manipulated all the time by non-human intelligence. But of course, it's not just non-human intelligence that can do the manipulation. Once you get to understand the code that underwrites that perceptual interface, all manner of people, things, bodies, entities can manipulate that reality space. So that's just my sort of 2 pence worth on the whole sort of projection thing. But it is unquestionably, for me, an area that deserves our study.
Yeah, I think orbs to me are more interesting than structured craft. It could be a reflection very well of whatever you want to consider a soul, life energy. In fact, there's some studies done in those who've had Kundalini awakenings, one by Wolcott, of scientists and scholars who had these spiritual transformative encounters. And again, many of their symptoms are consistent with the UAP interaction, and NDE, OBE, etc., all being having shared characteristics, attributes, where they have self boundaries are I guess boundless, so they feel that oneness, the unconditional love, bliss, and the luminosity, the perception of there was almost all 40 in one study, they had the perception of light. They were enveloped in it, or it was emitted from their body. Likewise, those on deathbed, upon death, family members will often report seeing smoke or light coming from them. Again, subjective interpretation. But again, light is a common characteristic. Whether or not that reflects our typical round little orb doing its dance outside or inside the home, I guess that's another question. But here again, that does intrigue me, unless we're being tricked. But that does go in line with Charles, I think, with your perspective on this, possibly.
Well, the ones that I have seen, the little ones that used to hang around my house would often appear as orbs. I remember when I joined the Sufi path back in 1988, they pretty much disappeared. But before then, I would welcome them. So, here are our friends again. You would see them lying in bed at night, little blips. There they are, and. But the time came when I understood that the more attention I put to that level of things, which is undoubtedly real, and let me not be misunderstood, not entirely evil by any means, but I had changed the center of my focus toward concentrating upon God alone. And if you're going to concentrate upon God alone and use your precious spiritual attention for that purpose in this life, which is short, the more attention you put upon the place where the orbs come from, or I call it the realm of the pixie dust, you're basically using up attention that could, if you're called to it, be placed upon the one. And it is my struggle to place it there, even though I've spent plenty of time looking to those other worlds with psychedelic drugs, with misuse of Kundalini yoga, with any number of psychic experiments earlier in my life. But that's not my intent now. I can't say I'm entirely free of those beings, but it's not my intent to go after them. But it's true, we do need some transcendent point of reference. You follow out materialism and you get as arcane as materialism can get with your trans-Einsteinian physics and and all the speculations about different dimensions, but a point comes where you have to say there's got to be something beyond this, or none of this makes sense. The something beyond it is what gives meaning to this whole realm of understanding. And if you have a traditional religious upbringing, you are more likely to see what is beyond it in terms of the angelic. The idea of the reality of angels is not something that's part of your habitual worldview. This other dimension may appear as any number of things simply to get through to us. I will admit the possibility that what I would call angels may, in some cases, appear in forms that we would nowadays tend to identify as UFO aliens, whatever they may be, simply because that is our habitual way of looking at things. On the other hand, when you don't have a traditional, long-term, deeply understood way of dealing with that other dimension, which is in touch with a whole realm of doctrine and traditional morality and traditional protections and safeguards against what can come to you from the unseen world, then it's a crapshoot what will come through. So this is why, even though the religious traditions are in pretty bad shape nowadays, anybody's got to admit that, that's where I start from, which is a struggle in itself. But that's where I start from to understand what this is. So.
Yeah,
Maybe
thank you.
I'll try and answer.
Thank you for
Go
bringing
ahead.
I was just going to say, thank you for bringing in the spiritual, Charles, from that perspective. And yeah, so I'm sorry, was that you, Nick, or who wanted to speak again?
Greg.
I will make it short, and I wanted to answer both the parts of that question, at least from my point of view. One of them was, how do we know it's not just us making things up? I think our perception of everything is making things up, but then you get something as ethereal as a UFO or a spiritual or some kind of that experience that is a little bit different. Also, I do think that there is an external force that is not us that affects people. After that, who knows what model they're going to put it through, or what culture, genetics, upbringing, things you've read that shapes your experience and your memory, which is all you have. And the second part of that about the orbs, I find it fascinating that throughout, even before ufology and history, that light has been used to get people's attention. There is a painting that I really like by American artist Henry Osawa Tanner of the Annunciation, which is when the angel came and told Mary that she was pregnant with Jesus. And it's not an angel. What is sitting in the room with Mary, who is just this frightened, startled Middle Eastern woman, is a bar of light. That's all it is. And I thought that was very interesting to have that depicted in the late 1800s. So yes, light is a way of getting our attention, and then things flow from that. And almost all UFOs flow from, at least the majority of them, flow from seeing a moving light, a bright light, something that gets our attention.
You know, the whole most of the religious events that occurred in the axial age involved incidents of light. The burning bush, Akhenaten's, the light that he saw, Zoroaster's brightly lit being. So many of these are about light entering our realm and bringing with it some kind of a profound change in the way we see, and always as well. And this is what I find so problematic about that light, is that it brings with it demand for belief and often a demand for obedience. And I'm not a believer, and I'm terrible about obedience. So I guess I'm probably infected with the very demons that Charles fears, simply because I don't necessarily buy into the story of the light.
Well,
I think we have to find the truth inside ourselves.
Please don't run them down. They are your friends. Don't insult them. You know, they might get mad. Come on.
Oh God, they get mad at me all the time. I don't care.
Yeah.
Although it can be unbelievably terrifying. Believe me.
Yeah.
I don't want to go down that
Beautiful
road.
if that were to end
I
someday.
don't care. I'm interested in the journey. I don't want it to end. I'll make them mad on purpose just to see what'll happen.
Well, okay, I have a challenge for you then. You want to make them mad on purpose? Consult a traditional Catholic exorcist and see
I've done
what
that.
happens.
I know a fabulous exorcist,
Who'd you go to?
and he's been to my house and worked in my
Oh,
house.
good. And what happened? This is a story.
Nothing whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
Nothing.
I mean, did he say, "Oh God, it didn't work"? Oh, wow. I mean, what?
No, he prayed for 2 or 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe because it's not about us in that sense.
Well,
it's about us in a deeper way.
You have that piece of information, whatever that may be. Now, anyway, so I'm glad you investigated that angle of things at least. So,
Jeff, what did you say? I missed what you said.
I said it's a data point that Whitley saw an exorcist and nothing happened. It's just a piece of data.
Well, his attitude was, you didn't want anything to happen. That's why nothing happened.
Maybe he was right.
You're probably right.
There may be something to that. Yeah.
So I know we've got many questions, and obviously we're running short of time. Our scheduled time will run another 15 minutes. And I should add, we were expecting Daniel Sheehan to join us. He's one of the contributors to the book, and his institute, the New Paradigm Institute, is working toward government disclosure of what they know. And we have another viewer who is also asked about Chris Bledsoe, who says, if I recall correctly, that by 2026, full disclosure will take place. And Daniel Sheehan has said almost something similar. He says that, he's in touch with all these whistleblowers, and if the government isn't going to disclose things, he will. And of course, there have been all sorts of leaks, but recently I interviewed another UFO author, not part of this group, Keith Thompson, who pointed out that we've been hearing since the 1950s that full disclosure is about to occur any day now. And he says, don't believe it. All the people who are saying we're going to have disclosure very soon, he thinks it's just a repeat of an old mantra that's been around for a long time. So I'm sorry that Daniel isn't here to speak for himself about it, but I wonder if our panelists have any thoughts regarding the likelihood of disclosure.
I would like to say something about this. First, our relationship with this level of reality starts there, not here. It is not controlled by the government. I've been involved with, back in the 90s, I was involved with the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and they were fighting to get the National Security Agency to disclose things to them and trying to get me to help ask the right kind of questions. Then in 2000, I believe in 2008, the Bush administration gathered a committee together to a bunch of people from the defense establishment and the defense industry to divide it up into, I think, 8 committees. And every committee went in expecting to recommend, yes, it's time to disclose, and came out of it recommending, no, it's not. And nothing happened as a result. And this is because there is another level here that is in control of this. And it's not us. It's not the Defense Department. It's not the government. It's no one at this level. This is not where it is going to unfold. I am quite close to some of these people that I call the visitors, and I tried to worm something out of them. You notice if you look at my work, you'll see there are no predictions. This is what I finally wormed out of them in terms of the future of disclosure. It will come upon them unawares. In other words, it's going to be a surprise. So, Merry Christmas.
And it comes down to how you define disclosure. Of course, they've recognized that the phenomena is real. But for me, until you have a team of independent scientists verifying both in the picture and in DNA sequences similarities among, again, independent laboratories, to me, that's a form of disclosure that's undeniable. And if and when that's going to happen, it could happen tomorrow or never, and that we can only wonder about.
Yeah, I've said this before, and I'll repeat it. The idea of disclosure, at least the public one that most people talk about, means for a lot of people, I want to hear exactly what I believe, and I want to hear it from people that have never told me the truth about this kind of thing before. And if I don't hear what I believe or have my beliefs reconfirmed, that means there's a cover-up. And I tend to be more on Whitley's level. It's like, no, the phenomenon has control of this. And we ourselves, as individuals and as free-thinking people, have control of this. There's a case to be made that a disclosure has already happened. The fact that we're sitting here talking about it more and more is part of that. So yeah, I think the ultimate answer comes with as Whitley actually again said a long time ago, the revelation is coming on the most democratic way possible, and I think that's what's ultimately any kind of disclosure will be, that because it is incomprehensible the way that we understand the world now, I think, for a government or an official entity to explain that to us. So I think it has to be individual.
Well, I certainly agree with Whitley that it's not the Defense Department who's in control. The ultimate controllers, or the penultimate controllers, I would say, are from another dimension. This is true. On the other hand, I believe there are some people in the military-industrial intelligence complex who know quite well who these beings are and have ongoing interactions with them, not through crashed spacecraft or recovered alien bodies or recovered living aliens, but on a psycho-spiritual level. And one of the games, I believe, in terms of mass social engineering that they are playing is that they will tease us with disclosure forever, almost, and then no, yes, no. Well, when we'll tell you everything, no, on the other hand, we deny. This drives people so crazy that the point may come when they determine that we are so hot for the truth. The truth is out there and it's so close, but we can't quite get it. We're so hot for it that at that point they will be able to feed us anything. And we will swallow it if it gives us a sense of closure at last. Whether or not it's true is quite secondary. It'll give us a sense of closure. We say, and that is what they really want us to believe. But they're not going to tell us what they really want us to believe, which will not be true until we ourselves demand it. And if we ourselves demand it, we will, by God, believe it, because we've spent all our lives trying to get it, and finally it is here. And that time has perhaps not come yet, but it may come.
Des, you're pretty quiet.
I have a similar opinion on this to what everyone's saying, really. Although I think disclosure is individual to each of us, because we create our own realities based on our experiences. I mean, for myself, from what I've seen in remote viewing and what I've read in books and, investigated over the years, I kind of have my own personal disclosure already. I know they're there. I know they exist. But as a worldwide global disclosure, I don't see it happening. And as Whitley said, the Department of Defense, the government, they aren't in control of this situation. It's these higher or other beings that are holding all the cards. So whether they ever want to come forward with this, I don't know. They don't seem to be coming too forward, to this point in history.
We won't get disclosure because government, military, in my mind, do not have definite answers, even if they admitted that there are bodies that they know about, aware of, tested upon. I don't even think they're going to disclose that, because there are a billion other questions that are associated with that, to which they don't have. So given their position, they don't want to be in a position to confront the public who are going to ask these kind of questions of them. And thus they don't want to cause, as we all know, the panic and the fear that among many that this could create, especially to those in particular that are very sensitive to this information from a psychological standpoint. And we all know the ramifications of financial markets, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to be, before they disclose, they have to be 110% convinced. What that criteria is anybody's guess. But again, for the third time, it's DNA in my mind, and I think that would be tenuous for them to disclose even on that level as well.
We also have to think about what will we actually believe in this day and age as well, because we've all seen so many fake videos and AIs becoming dominant, being able to fake pretty much anything out there. I have to ask myself, what would I take nowadays as evidence to be believable anyway? And, what would the general public take to be real solid evidence that they could believe, bearing in mind, everything being fake, social media, and all those constitutes in place. It would be hard.
Yeah, it's sort of like the field of parapsychology with ESP, telepathy, near-death experiences, that it almost seems that one needs to have an experience to really experience what's happening. I know we have just 5 minutes left. Jeff, there's a question I would love to pose. Is that okay, or is there one you're seeing you would like to ask?
Well, go ahead, Emmy, and we should all begin thinking about any final statements we'd like to make to our viewers as well.
Okay, so this question comes in from a regular viewer, Andrei Slavosh-Krozowski, who asks, are there any attempts to remote view UFOs by many viewers at the same time, with similar methodology that Stefan Schwartz did for archaeology and for the future? And I just want to add that I know Jeff and I have had conversations about this, and one of the tenets of remote viewing is that you actually get feedback. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any comments on that. And then, yes, if you want to, we've got a few minutes left. I don't mind if we go a few minutes over, but we also do have our moderators helping. So Daz, do you want to?
For me, yeah. Well, I've run many projects against UAPs, both as being a blind remote viewer and also as the project manager. In most of the projects I work, we usually use between 5 and 12 remote viewers, and I allow them to use whatever mixed methodology they want to use, as long as we work within the protocols. And I try as much as possible, as I said earlier, to only work on cases which I think have a credible amount of data to give you feedback upon, things like the Tic Tac, because it has all the witness statements, radars, the video, that kind of thing. So only on certain credible cases. But yeah, we do that all the time. And as I said, the data's up on in the public domain for anyone to watch.
Can you share briefly what you have found that has been consistent with your remote viewers, or anything that strikes you that you want to share with the audience today about those?
What strikes me the most is the technology that these beings use, beings being a loose word, in that even we found and seen that even the very fine kind of suits that they wear, the clothing they wear, even that is connected to the consciousness of the being that's wearing it. So it's almost like the clothing has a consciousness itself that connects to the being, which connects to the ship or the craft, whatever you want to call it. So it seems to be embedded in every part of their everyday living and technology is consciousness. It flows through everything, and it's all connected, all alive.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, we just technically have about 3 minutes left. So maybe could we start with Bob? Do you have any final thoughts? And maybe we would just
no, based on what little I know about the phenomenon, regardless of its nature, it challenges obviously the foundation of our beliefs of what reality is. and let it serve to expand our intellectual and spiritual horizons, and let it also encourage us to have a more inclusive approach regarding both the physical and non-physical aspects in the form of consciousness, however that may be defined, to better understand the phenomenon and very likely the possibility of existence itself.
Greg?
Okay, I was making sure I wasn't muted. I'm really interested right now in trying to find out what a right-brained approach to the UFO problem can bring us, because we've concentrated on the left brain, the technology, the things look like machines. So we look at them as machines and we treat them as something that can be confined to a data set. And I don't think that will give us the full picture of what's going on. If something can change somebody's life in 30 seconds, that can't be put in a data set, and we have to kind of try and find out what that might be, what is affecting people.
Thank you. Whitley?
Okay, there was a philosopher called Edmund Gettier who posited something called the cow problem, which I will very briefly explain. A farmer has a Hereford, a black and white cow. He is unsure as to whether or not she's ill. So he puts her in a separate field near his barn where he's working so he can look at her from time to time and be sure she's not ill. In that field, which is otherwise completely empty, is a tree and a little hollow. Only if the cow were to wander into the little hollow would he be unable to see her. So he's confident that he will be able to watch over her. While he's working in the barn, two things happen. The cow does wander into the little hollow, and a piece of black and white paper blows in and snags under the tree. The cow is fine. She's perfectly healthy. He glances into the field. He sees the black and white paper and thinks his cow is fine. He is right and wrong at the same time. The cow is fine. He did not, in fact, see her. This gets me to a statement often made by a dear friend, the author of Mary Poppins, and she was in the Gurdjieff work, and she used to say something that I think is definitive here. To lie in the lap of the goddess means to be unsure. And all of us in this world are lying in the lap of the goddess right now.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Pamela Travers. I realized I didn't say her name.
Travers, yeah.
He was your mentor.
One of them, yeah.
She was briefly associated with the first Sufi order that I was with, the Namatulahiyya. I think that's what you went to or went past after the Gurdjieff work, apparently. So,
Charles, do you have any?
yeah, what I would say is, given all the terrible shocks that the whole human race is now undergoing, the climate change, the wars, the social breakdown, the economic fear, the development of transhumanism and artificial intelligence, each one of which totally devastates our consensus reality, shatters it. The day may soon come when our consensus reality crashes collectively across the board, and the truth that has always been behind this show of a world will be revealed, and we will see it face to face. And that may be the day that those beings that Whitley was talking with, when the truth of who they are will be revealed to everyone democratically across the board, at an unexpected moment, which the Christian tradition calls apocalypse, which means revelation. This may happen, and that's when the truth and the consequences of the truth will be known to everyone. And of course, people's reaction to it will be different based upon how they related to it during the rest of their lives. But this may be in the offing fairly soon. And that will answer all questions, and it will sweep away uncertainty. And certainty itself will be established in the heart of every one of us, to our great good fortune or to our great dismay. As it says in the Gospels, it will be as the lightning comes forth from the east and shines even to the west, across the board, from beginning of time to end. At once. That's the light that people have been talking about. That light will come inevitably to everyone. So let us ready ourselves for it the best we can.
Thank you, Charles. And Daz, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, just a quick final comment in that I guess most of my life looking at these subjects, UAPs and consciousness, they've been pretty much held separately, and never the twain shall meet kind of thing. When in reality, and I hope people start to use and investigate this a lot more, it's a symbiotic relationship between UAPs and consciousness. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, really.
Right. There's a consciousness component.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and also on behalf of Nick Cook, who had to leave early. I want to say goodbye for him. He sort of ducked out without having a chance to say goodbye to our audience. I'd also like to remind the viewers that the New Thinking Aloud Foundation publishes a quarterly magazine. We also have a weekly email newsletter. And but most of all, I want to thank our wonderful panelists. This was a very fruitful and rewarding discussion. I'm sorry there were so many questions, dozens and dozens and dozens of excellent questions we just didn't have time for today, but we will be uploading new videos. These days we're uploading 4 to 5 a week on consciousness, on the paranormal, on philosophy, psychology, health, science, and spirituality. So we'll be around for a long time. And of course, I want to thank Emmy, my co-host, for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you all for being with us. It's been a joy. I've loved hearing all of your insights, your comments, and I know everybody can find you and follow you on social media, get in touch to the beautiful work that you're sharing with the world. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you all are the reason that we are here.